Gurdjieff, when he introduced this system, he was sharing that there are two aspects of this knowledge, and they are both necessary. They need each other. There's the psychology and there is the cosmology. The cosmology deals more like with the laws of the creation, the laws of the universe, the bigger picture. In the system, it is important to tackle both.
You've been thinking about this for a while now, this topic, Mihai. What has made it, I guess for lack of a better word, inspiring for you of late?
Many teachings, they have an aspect of the inner world and the bigger picture. It really touched me and impacted me, and I sensed like, whoa, this is really important. The self is everything. There's the so-called inner world and so-called outer world. But the inner and the outer, that's more like a mentalization. We call the inner world what's inside the body, and the outer world what's outside the body. So it's a body-based differentiation. And I could see that when I was younger, because I didn't grok the cosmology, it kept me in a separate me trying to wake up. How about you, Peter? Can you share a little bit? So what do you mean by cosmology, and what are some of the core themes or ideas? What's your understanding of cosmology? What are those principles, tenets, and why is it important, and how was it for you?
As you were speaking, I was recalling when I first encountered the idea of the cosmology, which in the fourth way is an enunciation of the structure of the universe. That's how it's presented initially. Here suddenly, I was a young man, I came across this explanation about the structure of the universe, principally as a series of worlds within worlds within worlds. Instead of everything being one universe and in one dimension, in the same dimension, we think of the sun being in the same dimension that we're in. It's actually we see it from our dimension, but it's in its own dimension. The galaxy is another dimension, a higher order of world, completely. Suddenly, it was as though I had zoomed out of myself, almost leaving myself on the surface of the earth, expanding out, presumably to the source, what the fourth way in the cosmology is called the absolute, or what some teachings might call Brahman, the all, where everything is one, and the source of all, the source from which everything else manifests, but in different forms and in different dimensions and under different laws. The laws are the same, the principles are the same, but the way these laws manifest and the forms that these different dimensions take are different, but they're all acting according to the same fundamental laws or principles. And this I found astonishing and at the same time very simple. And it was so inspiring and emotional, and it was as though for the first time I had always been looking at everything from the inside out. Myself, my world, the universe, creation, and suddenly I was zoomed out and I was looking at it from the outside in. This became a whole new way of thinking, but it became more than that too. And that's why I think it's hard to talk about it and have it be more than just theory, because there's something very emotional, there's something very inspiring about this tremendous scale. So this is why it's important to me, this scale, and that awareness has the same thing. When awareness is more consciously aware, there's a much bigger view, a much bigger scale of perception. Sometimes it can be a relief to get out of ourselves and all this psychology and thinking about all the obstacles in our way, and to kind of put that behind us and open the window and go out and see from a different vantage point and see ourselves from a different point of view. For example, this idea of what the fourth way calls the ray of creation this is the architectural design that's given to what we call the universe, these worlds within worlds within worlds. And things become, as you go deeper, each world is inside of the world above it. We are down here on Earth in this little world, as you said earlier, and then we're inside this planetary world, inside the solar world, inside the galactic world, inside the world of all the galaxies that are all inside some larger whole. That's the way that it's broken down in the fourth way. And the fact that we can sit here on Earth in human form with human minds and discuss this, and we are not even recognizable, even on the scale of the solar system. As an individual, you wouldn't be able to find us, much less on the scale of the entire universe, the entire array of creation, as the fourth way calls it. To me, this is sometimes it's like a big breath of fresh air to breathe with these kind of thoughts and these kinds of ideas on this scale, thinking not just about me, my life, me wanting to wake up or my problems, but to see there's this big, huge thing. It's like a big clock and we're just a small cog. And yet we have this awareness. This awareness is the thing common to all these worlds. And it is, most importantly, directly related to the source of all creation. Gurdjieff said something like, you have no idea what a person is capable of achieving when it comes to consciousness and awareness. The scale, the magnitude, the profundity. People who walk around, they have no idea what's in them in terms of this consciousness, were it to start recognizing itself, realizing itself in a simple way, that we can be present and know we're being present. This is the beginning of this huge reality of connecting to the source of all creation. This is why I find it emotional. This is why I continue to study this. I continue to embrace it. It continues to serve as great drafts of fresh air for me spiritually. And again, just to finish up this thought, I remember when I first encountered these ideas, I was sort of astonished. My mind was both blown and I was both relieved and inspired to encounter this idea of worlds within worlds and higher dimensions, and how it all fits together to provide a whole new way of understanding our lives and a whole new way of understanding what awakening means, as best as the mind can understand that.
Yeah, riffing on what you said just a minute ago. Yeah, this worlds within worlds, cosmos within cosmos. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, 7 levels of cosmoses, one within the other. And what you described as there's the body of humanity. You can look at all the billions of people alive and all the billions of people that never existed. At a certain timeline, it's just one man. It's just one. It's the man, human. But then there is the flora and fauna and the insects and all of that. But actually, if you go inside, I'm not sure. I think it's called a tritocosmos. Doesn't matter how it's called. But inside, basically, there's a whole other universe with all the organs and the cells, and you can go into the digestive system, where there's a whole world of these bacteria and various things. And if you go into I saw a video. Somebody was lying on his back and looking to the sky, and then they went out, solar system, Milky Way, and they were seeing all of these things, how it was, and then it went back in, the person lying on the back, and then went into the cornea, and then all of these various worlds. And they were looking very similar, actually, because there's only God, basically, in the Islam, that there is only God here. There's only one. There's nothing apart from God.
This is where it gets distorted also. This idea of God as one, that God is just like an enormous human being somewhere, and we're inside of it. It's this God that's spoken about is really referring to the consciousness, the source, the formlessness from which all the form in the universe has emerged or manifested from, or some teachings would even say has been dreamt, is being imagined, it's just being projected, all as imagery in the vast mind of this absolute consciousness.
I myself had the difficulty with the word God for a long time because it's associated with some ignorant ideas. Ouspensky and Gurdjieff, they didn't use the word God. They wanted to have no associations with that and call it the infinite, his endlessness, the absolute. So when we use the word God, we are not talking about some man-made, mind-made God. And when we mean God, we are talking about what we're talking about, Tao, reality, the endlessness, the source. So what are some other important fourth way teachings on the cosmology, important ideas? Or
one, for example, there's a lot of emphasis is put on the idea of the influence of the moon on humanity and on our psychology. And this is a cosmological phenomenon, that there's a small infant planet circulating around the Earth. It is almost like it's an embryonic planet according to the fourth way. And it is circling inside the orbit, inside the gravitational field. And it is what is responsible for the tides, and it is exerting this pull on the Earth. It's like a child dependent on the mother. And there's, according to this theory, an umbilical cord that feeds the moon, and that the energy of what happens when living creatures of all kinds die, their magnetic field, which had enlivened them during their so-called life, is siphoned off, suctioned off to the moon, and is actually feeding the moon, and the moon is growing. And this pressure that's exerted on the surface of the Earth by the moon 24 hours a day has an effect on human psychology, because we are a chemical machine, a chemical factory, according to the fourth way. And all of these chemicals and all these forces were easily influenced by radiation from the sun, the magnetic field of the sun, the magnetic pull of the moon. Lots of things unseen that affect us. That's just one idea. Another idea in the fourth way, of course, the way we were taught the fourth way, is that each of the planets within our solar system has a very strong governing influence over the major endocrine glands in our body. These planets are each like a transmitting station of a certain kind of influence, and each human being is a receptor, like a little radio antenna, receiving these transmissions, these influences of a celestial nature, a cosmological nature. It affects behavior, it affects our physical appearance, it affects our psychological tendencies. And these ideas are hinted at in ancient mythology and some ideas associated with the zodiac. The zodiac is referring really to the influences coming from the galaxy. They're much farther away, much harder to detect, much harder to know about, and much easier to generalize about. But the study of how the planets affect us individually is more verifiable on a personal level. So just that, there's a moon out there. It's not an arbitrary thing. It's not an accident. The moon reflects the light of the sun. We benefit from the light of the sun almost not only during the day, but during the night, via the reflection of the sun on the moon. The moon is just this mirror. And this, corresponds internally. In the fourth way, the moon is akin to the ego. Our ego is not a thing. It's just a reflecting image in our mind. It's reflecting the light of consciousness, of awareness. It appears to us that it has light. It appears to us that it has consciousness. It appears to us that it's a real identity, this ego that forms in us. By virtue of it's as though the light of the sun is shining. That light is reflecting off the moon. The sun no longer recognizes itself as the sun, and it thinks it is this moon. And this is exactly the case with our consciousness and the ego. And so this is where this parallel, this idea, these same laws exist inside of us that exist outside of us. And what we experience as our psychological identity is a lower world in us, in our psychology. And consciousness, awareness, beginning to recognize itself is akin to the sunlight, beginning to realize itself as light, and ultimately recognizing itself as the source of that light, the sun itself. These are the exact same phenomena operating in different dimensions, but according to exactly the same laws. If you're quiet and you sit and you take this in, this can be quite powerful, can be quite humbling. It's such a worthwhile study, and to see we are so prone to insulating ourselves inside of ourselves. We feel so unique, we feel so isolated, we feel so separate. And this is where a lot of our problems happen. our imaginary suffering and a lot of our turmoil, we are so tightly knit inside of our own psychology. And a part of what awakening means is getting out of that. Awareness untangling itself from all of that, and us being more present just to our immediate surroundings is already a big thing. And so knowing about these ideas can help you not get so lost in your own person. And what about you, Mihai? What do you find practical, or what some of the aspects of the cosmology in particular that stand out for you, or that you have found pertinent, relevant in your work, in your life?
What is most inspiring or active in my day-to-day, because that's actually one aim would be to gradually make these cosmological things alive in one's life. I guess what is this thing that basically the absolute somehow, or the totality, the infinite, is pulsing life into the infinite and it's sustaining it. Basically there is like apparently in the fourth way, every creature breathes, and the insect and the hummingbird and the elephant, and there is a breathing, and the planet is breathing, the planet is breathing, the solar system is breathing. And it's interesting, this idea that although a breath of a hummingbird and a breath of a firefly, or a breath of a human, a breath of an elephant, and a breath of the solar system, they are very different in terms of human time. At the same time, the idea is that there's the same duration at their own scale. So at the scale of the dimension within dimension. So for us, like a little butterfly that lives for 3 days, it will be, oh man, it's just such a short life. Or an ant that lives like this, but apparently it's the same life. In their scale, the butterfly has like 90 years, has a full, rich experience of life. And so that somehow I got this more that basically we are being pulsed and sustained. And we, as the ego, we are not doing it. We are being pulsed, sustained, and there's a complete interdependence of everything else. So that, for me, it helped me to loosen up this idea of me being someone inside who is a doer and a thinker and a decider, and to I'm doing this, like taking credit and all this pressure, but actually everything is happening according to the unfolding of God, and it's taken care of. The universe, God, is sustaining every cell of the body, and all of these things, all of this is happening, and somehow the sun rises and the photosynthesis is happening, and all of these things are happening by the grace of the infinite.
This connects right to the essential tenet of the fourth way, which is that these ideas, unlike many ideas that you come across in ordinary knowledge or science, incorporate what is called scale and relativity. Scale meaning there are different dimensions, there are different worlds. Things exist on different scales, but just as you said, what is happening within each dimension is operating according to the same laws. What seems like 24 hours for us may be just one breath for the world of nature. Every 24 hours, it takes a breath, just as we take a breath every 3 seconds, more or less. And then relativity means everything is related to everything else. Everything is actually part of one whole. these two ideas together can have tremendous value for us psychologically because they can help us be less identified. As soon as we start to think with more scale and have more relativity, see more the connectedness of things, and understand, as you say, we're not doing our lives. Our lives are being pulsed. Now this opens the view. It helps us diminish our attachment to all of these things, all of these forms, and be more simply present. It doesn't mean we're going to understand everything. In fact, in the beginning, it takes the form of being present to the realization that it's all a mystery. Wow, there's a whole universe inside of me right now, with all these nerves and tendons and muscles and blood and neurons. It's all happening right now, all by itself. And similarly, out there, out here, wow, the solar system's staying together. The water's not falling off the planet. The oceans aren't spilling out into space. Whoa, how do you explain this? We become less and less identified with the help of ideas of scale and relativity.
Yeah, even honestly contemplating about these things, being open to it, it will bring a different, higher perspective to our struggles and problems, and that we take personally and resist. It's interesting that I think I read somewhere from Uspensky that he was saying this, actually the time of the cell, or the time of the liver, it's a different time. So that's why you have a little whiskey or smoke some joint, and within a few seconds or a minute, you feel something is happening. And he said, well, how can it be? So many processes are happening molecularly, and for this to be processed and digested and transformed. And how can it be in 30 seconds? And Uspensky was saying, well, for the inner world, for the cosmos within us, this 1 minute of ingesting something is like 8 hours of work, of laboratory. So actually they had 8 hours at their time scales, and they broke it down, and there's no problem. But if we just keep our human scale, then it seems like a miracle.
And the same with the planetary influences acting on us. As Gurdjieff pointed out, on the planetary scale, one body in the universe can move around or near another body, and there's tension, but the effect it has on us may last for years. That may affect the Earth and the dynamic of events on the Earth for years. It's exactly the same again. This idea of worlds within worlds, different scales, the same laws operating, but in different dimensions.
I reread or listened to this masterpiece, like Beelzebub's Tales to His Grandson, Gurdjieff's masterpiece, and I was touched by that was some kind of perspective of the universe. The idea was that there's the one, the infinite, and then somehow there's the ray of creation and planets and systems and all of that, and then there are these beings. All of them are emanating out of the one reality, and then there's some kind of, in terms of spiritual or consciousness development or self-awareness, there's a wide range from God the Absolute to the highest level of super archangels. It's almost like it's a major company. It's a corporation. Basically, it's a whole corporation. I know this has bad connotations, but it's like a huge corporation. And there's the plan, the divine plan that is unfolding. And then there are these higher beings of archangels or life sustainers and life maintainers. And it's almost like they are his assistants, and they are working together to troubleshoot certain problematic aspect of the creation, and there are levels, descending levels, up to humans that are unconscious of what they are, unconscious of everything. They are living in a small world. Yeah, so there's this perspective is that one will be useful to our common Father, to be useful to God. If we are unconscious and asleep, we are seemingly not so useful, because we are can't understand the design, so we don't follow the plan. So we follow our own personal plan of happiness. And the more conscious we are, the more one becomes instrument and a servant of the infinite. I like that. I mean, that's a worth life living. That it's emotional for me.
It also connects to an aspect of the cosmology. The principle is that at its source, at its complete, all-encompassing source, the absolute, let's call it, there's a vibration of energy, a speed of vibration and a density of vibration. And at this absolute source, the speed of vibration is at its utmost, at its infinitely fast vibration, and that it's at the least dense, in the least dense concentration. And now as this larger world starts to manifest worlds inside of it, each progressively lower dimensional lower world starts to vibrate at a slower speed of vibration and to manifest in a more dense form. So from higher to lower, let's call it, in this universe, this ray of creation, things get slower and slower and more dense. Everything we can see is already, you could call it, densified into form. This is why I like to call it sometimes identification instead of identification. Because when we identify with things in ourselves, we kind of submerge into their more dense form. A good example, when we have, if you think of a thought, and we can't really measure what a thought is, but you can experience in yourself, a thought can vibrate with a certain density, a certain speed of vibration. It can be a light thought, it can be a dark thought. And then it can start to become a really negative thought. And now if you observe carefully, what you're really observing is it's now vibrating at a slower speed and in more dense form in your psychology. And then when it becomes a negative emotion, if you think of a deep depression or a violent anger, it's like it's so solid now and it's so dense. It's actually vibrating at a much slower speed of vibration, this negative emotion. And then presence itself, pure, a simple awareness, is very, very, very light and without form. It's so undense, you could say, it can't be seen. And so these worlds, this idea of higher and lower, progressive worlds inside worlds inside worlds, going from a high speed of vibration with no form at all, no density, and then becoming more and more dense. This is true in us. And we can observe this in ourselves, and this can become a barometer where you start to feel, you can feel you're more identified. You can feel you're becoming more negative. You can feel you're becoming more attached to a worry or to a fear or to insisting on something getting done a certain way. And you can automatically, once you have this barometer in yourself, you can draw back out. You can pull back into a higher world within yourself, into a lighter place. You're now vibrating at a higher speed in less dense psychological form until you can escape the psychological dimension altogether as awareness. This is the idea that consciousness is beyond the mind, awareness is beyond the mind. The Buddha, step out of your mind, step out of the thought world. That's what this is in scientific fourth way language. This is a higher world extracting itself from a lower world and ultimately find its way all the way back to its absolute source. This would be the full realization of oneness as this invisible, indivisible unity of being in which everything else is incorporated. You can go back and see art over the centuries depicting a lot of these same ideas in analogy, in the form of myth, in the form of art, in the form of imagery, in the form of the moon and the sun and the stars.
What you said here now alludes to, so the closer it is to the absolute, the more rarefied, fine frequency, vibration, higher, finer, lighter. And the more it goes, it descends into other dimensions. Within dimensions, it gets kind of heavier, less quick. Actually, this alludes obviously to what is called in the fourth way the table of hydrogens. And hydrogen is being, instead of saying higher frequency, high vibration, these days these terms are popular. In the fourth way, there is a hydrogen, and there's a higher, finer hydrogen and lower, heavier, denser hydrogen. And the higher, the finer the hydrogen, the closer it is to the divine, with all the benefits and goodies of that, like joy, peace, connectedness, love. And the lower the hydrogen or the vibration, that's more like further away from the divine. Although, I mean, it's all the divine, but within the divine there is the special section of like a hell. So the lower, heavier dimension, then it's closer to dimension of suffering, of deep, contracted, personally taking personally. You can see this at the level of outer and the inner. Basically, nature, the world of nature, the sunset and the Grand Canyon, there is a certain high frequency, higher hydrogen, beautiful sunset, beautiful ocean. Now you go and you see some nice village built in Greece with nature and with nice material. That's a certain frequency. Now you go to a city where there are blocks of flats. That now it's slightly different frequency, lower. Now you go to a ghetto where all these broken glasses and graffiti and all of that. The same with food. There is like organic, then you get this more like processed food, then you get junk food. And the same at the inner world. Basically in our inner world, we have from heaven and hell, we have everything. We have this from like really despair, hopelessness, suicidal, vengeance, you wronged me, distrust, fear, all that, to higher phenomena of understanding, acceptance, kindness, willingness, love, forgiveness, pure presence.
In the fourth way, in the cosmology, it's talked about the fact that everything in this universe, in this ray of creation, as it's called, are either ascending toward a finer, less dense, faster vibration, higher frequency, or descending to a slower, lower, denser dimension, world manifestation. And in the cosmology of the fourth way, it's spoken about as octaves of music, that you can go up in an octave or you can go down in an octave of music. The idea is that everything you can perceive in yourself and in the universe is either in an ascending octave or it's part of a descending octave. And this is also a very interesting way for us to look at the world more objectively. So for example, even think about a company. Let's say Mihai and I get together and we have an idea about a company. And it's just an idea. It has no form. It's just an inspired idea. But then we start actualizing this company. And now we hire some more people. We buy a building or we rent a building. We have furniture. We have office supplies. We have organizational principles. We have more and more employees. We're under more and more conditions of employment, of survival. And now this proliferates into hundreds or thousands or tens of thousands of employees and offices and equipment and who knows what. It becomes more and more multifaceted. It takes on more and more form, and it becomes a slower and slower moving ship. It's actually a descending octave, according to the fourth way cosmology, whereas it looks like, oh, this company's growing, it's expanding, it's on the rise, it's often said, things like this. But actually, no, it's not. In the universe, it's a descending octave. It's becoming more heavy, more slow, having more parts, and becoming harder to manage, taking on a life of its own, which may be completely removed from that original idea that Mihai and I had for a business, which was a spark of an idea. It's just one example of a descending octave. But we often see things backwards in this regard because we don't know about ideas like this. If you learn to think with these ideas, you can see things differently. You'll look at things in a very different way. And you'll also understand that the idea of enlightenment, awakening consciousness, it doesn't mean that this form is going to wake up. It doesn't mean that the human being is evolving, becoming more conscious. It means that consciousness inside the human form is realizing itself as a higher world, within this dimension. There are higher dimensions within this dimension. And these higher dimensions can realize themselves. And that's what this idea of enlightenment or awakening is. Everything's not one-dimensional. And there are more than 3 dimensions. There's more than our 3-dimensional world.
We may do videos on that. We'll see how it goes. But we alluded to the table of hydrogen. We alluded to the octaves, law of octaves. This is the law of 7, then law of 3. In the 4th way, the idea is that these are laws that are not known by science, that how the universe propagates itself, how the creation unfolds on certain these laws, law of 3, law of 7, 6 processes, which can only be seen and verified from a higher dimension in oneself.
It's the idea too that everything in creation is in motion, and its motion is being determined by these laws, the law of 7, the law of 3. But going back to the ancient Eastern idea, everything in creation is in motion in some manner, inside us and outside us, except for one thing. And that is this pure awareness aspect of our being. It is not in motion. Just like you can watch thoughts come and go, something is there, it's not coming and going. It may not be aware of itself being there, but the thoughts come and go. Events in our life come and go, but something is aware of them coming and going. This is another way of studying in ourselves these cosmological ideas. And in this sense, what happens is that there becomes less and less of a division, a seeming division between the psychology and the cosmology of the system. They are one. They're really one. They're the same phenomenon manifesting in different worlds according to these same laws. And there's that which sees all of this on a cosmological or psychological level. This is what wakes up.
It would be nice to linger here forever. But for the point of view of the video, something that touched me, it said, like, actually the study of, it's interesting, raising the level of awareness will help one navigate one's psychology, and the psychology loosens up. This loosening up of the psychology and the raising a level of awareness, and which comes with more receptivity, more openness, more finer perceptions. Then from this finer state of being, we look at the tree and then the sun, or at people, and with a higher level of consciousness and less dense psychology, the truth of the reality is revealed. And this changes my psychology now, because when I go, then I am feeling different attitudes and feelings and stuff towards the so-called people. Or other statements like, wherever your eyes fall, whatever you see, that is the face of God. These are statements coming from sages that are like high level of being. Is more like towards the 4th state of consciousness, objective consciousness, seeing reality as it is. That's juicy to at some point loosen up one's psychology and refine one's awareness so one can sniff the truth of that and maybe have more revelation of that. Because then, now there are relations. There's all the time, I have relations to people, relation to the government, relation to my mom with Peter, my girlfriend, relations to the beggar, relation to the store clerk, relation to everything. And so from this perspective, it's just the God having relations with itself. And from this perspective, is no longer this suffering of separation. From one angle, all the 4th way psychology and all the practices are meant to help us be awake enough to see that everything is the one, everything is God.
Also, this is related to this idea of worlds within worlds. See, if we take this logically, this idea everything is one, and now I'm going to view everything as one, and there's an attempt made from one world to see everything like that. And that doesn't work. That's just an idea, because we could say that each lower world is an illusion when seen from the world above it, the dimension surrounding it. And that as each higher dimension pops out and is now recognizes the dimension inside of it, it sees that dimension inside as an illusion. Just as we may have long thought we are our thoughts. We think that we are our thoughts. And then through self-observation and trying to be present, trying to be aware, we start to see them out here. From an internal perspective, we see a thought, and we realize what is seeing the thought is not the thought. The thought is now an illusion. It appears, it emerges as a thing, and then it goes away. It's just like an illusion does. And so in this sense, it is an illusion. The same can be true of you can see that your entire life as a human being is exactly the same as a single thought. And there's a part of us that is capable of seeing this thought, this so-called life, passing in front of it, emerging, taking form for a period of time, and then disappearing as an illusion. And in this sense, our whole life as this person, this is an illusion, but something that's seeing that is in yet a higher world, perceiving that. And so this idea that things are an illusion also has relativity. We have to bring scale and relativity to an idea like this and see that, because then you could say for a thought, the thought thinks it is real, cannot see itself as an illusion. But if something is stepping out of that dimension, it can see the thought as an illusion. And similarly with each world, you have to something has to arrive at a very pure, high, rarefied dimension of awareness to really know the truth of what we're talking about here. This idea that everything is one and everything is a manifestation of this one source, but in different dimensions, different worlds, different levels of density and vibration. Part of the mystery of creation is, you could say that each dimension thinks it is the only dimension. Each lower dimension thinks it is itself. It's not cognizant of itself in relation to higher dimensions. And that's what's unique about us as human beings. We can begin to recognize higher dimensions. As far as I can tell, animals don't have this capacity. Rocks and flowers and water doesn't have this capacity. But human beings, we are very unique in this sense. Some kind of rare, made in the image of God, as the Bible said. We have this capacity to be conscious of everything else. Something in us, this awareness in us, has this capacity. And this is God within each of us. It's the same phenomenon of being. And it's in us. It's just unrecognized. It's not recognizing itself. And it can recognize itself more and more and more deeply.
I guess I haven't mentioned that, but another very powerful encapsulation of truth is this: Atman is Brahman. But Atman as that which is aware, presence, and Brahman is absolute source. So it's not that the presence is connected to God or could be expanded into God. No, the presence and God is the same, is the same.
We could linger here too, forever. But we've been going for a while now, Mihai. That's a nice note for us to pause on and maybe pick up another time.
Yes, let's do that. And what I want to say to the right attitude to tackle this video is to not to believe it now, to believe it, oh yeah, and now start to have a new belief while being asleep and believing that everything is one and this or that. But being open to the possibility that it is true, being open to the possibility, and then doing one's own psychological consciousness work. Doing all of that, where we are basically loosening and diminishing the illusion inside. And by diminishing, we are removing the clouds of illusion, and then there will be less clouds of illusion, and then we see reality as it is, and then we're like, it dawns on us, it's a revelation.